Once a system is interacted, no matter how far apart you take the parts, they stay connected. And what you do to one, you do to the other. And that's called non-locality, entanglement. Everything is interconnected. You can never separate.
Right.
And how do these principles then become guides to life?
What does quantum physics have to do with healing our planet? My guest today, quantum physicist Dr. Vandana Shiva, became an environmental activist when she realized that the key to healing our world lies in reawakening our connection to nature and each other. Her philosophy, which merges ancient wisdom with quantum theory, invites us to embrace interconnectedness and rediscover nature's sacredness. I'm your host, Elizabeth Rovere, a clinical psychologist, yoga teacher, and graduate of Harvard Divinity School. I am forever curious about our experiences of wonder and awe and how they transform us. With Wonderstruck, we invite you to explore these ideas through conversations with experts and experiencers across disciplines and perspectives. Welcome to Season 3. So it's just so wonderful to sit here with you today, Vandana Shiva. It's just been my utter pleasure to meet you and spend time with you. And I'm really grateful that you're here and on the podcast with us today. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Elizabeth, thank you. Thank you for making all this happen and bringing us together. And it's a joy meeting you.
I love the story that you really grew up kind of in the mountains in the Himalaya, and you read a book on Einstein with the quotes, and your path started becoming this nature and science pathway in theoretical physics. I mean, it's such a beautiful story into what you do now. And I was wondering if you would share with us, what was it like growing up in nature in that way?
Yeah, and of course, there was another element that my parents had made a choice to be in nature. And they'd also were always spiritual seekers.
Yeah.
We didn't get any exposure to religion in its fundamentalism and hate and exclusion, but we got an exposure to the best teachers of our times. Ananda Mahima, Swami Shivanand, Neem Karoli Baba. My dad gave the license to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi for setting up the ashram where the Beatles came and stayed. So, I mean, this was our lives. So consciousness was the ocean in which we were a part. We weren't studying it, we weren't objective about it. We were swimming in it. And I think that, and the phrase that's used always is to be in higher consciousness, you know? So when, of course, in physics, your teachers are always saying, solve the equation, solve the equation, solve the equation. I said, no, I want to understand the wonder of the world. Yeah? And so I went on to do a PhD in quantum theory. But I was always doing it with that deeper sense of how are we in this world? Because the mechanistic explanation didn't make sense in the forest. It doesn't make sense in spirituality, and it doesn't make sense in the quantum world.
It doesn't make sense intuitively.
It just doesn't make sense. Too violent and too crude, you know? Who thinks mechanically?
Yeah.
And the dominators do, because it's very convenient. They've internalized it so much because they've lived it for so long. And that's where the extractive mentality and dominating mentality comes from. Otherwise, you've got these, built-in bricks. You can't do this to another human being. You can't do this to this forest. You can't do this to this river.
Right.
So the breaks of consciousness become so natural when you are conscious about consciousness. And when you shed the living aspects of living organism, you shed the consciousness aspect of conscious beings, then you are in a free-for-all. And that's where the violence, in my view, begins. But it is not natural to ordinary human beings.
No.
So even think of our relationship with children. The word education is derived from educare. And it's the Latin word, and it basically is to bring out the potential of the child. It doesn't say fill an empty brain.
Right.
With whatever is useful for you to use as human raw material. Because we are reducing humans to the same kind of raw material as we did the iron ore, as we did the bauxite and aluminium. Yeah, the humans are the new raw material with this whole data obsession.
Right.
But data is not knowledge.
No.
Information is not wisdom.
Yeah.
And all of that, the beautiful presentation on the left hemisphere or the right hemisphere, the organizing principles of values, of memory, of being able to say this is right and wrong.
Right.
That comes from the right hemisphere. Managing data? Yeah, that little bit can be downloaded into a machine. But the conscious being is A, in relationship with all other conscious beings, and B, is in consciousness, therefore, its life is self-organized, its life is autopoietic.
Right.
And that bit is unique to conscious living beings.
We've been talking about consciousness, and we were talking about how it's not just quantum science, and consciousness isn't just some kind of theory. I mean, it is a theory, but it's also a way of life. Because I had asked you, how did you go from being a theoretical physicist to an environmental activist, right? I had thought that it was different. But when we talked, you explained how it's actually not really so different, that there's a natural way that this unfolded. And I think that, we talked about starting and why are we living in a Newtonian world when we've moved from that theory 100 years ago? At least scientists have disproven the Newtonian world, but we live in it still in our psyche or in our consciousness and way of being. So I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about, what is quantum everyday life, so to speak, and how you live in that way, and how you got from being a physicist to an environmental activist.
The mechanistic age, which is unfortunately called the classical thinking, nothing very classical about it, nothing grand. It's a very crude way of organizing the world. And it does not begin with Newton. Newton just gave the laws of motion. But it came 100 years after the real architects of the mechanical world, Bacon and Descartes, laid out a world of separation, that humans are separate from nature, we are masters of nature, nature is mere extension to be measured and weighed, and mere raw material. Because when it's purely raw material to extract, then all you need to know is how many tons of iron ore you can take, or silver, or gold. So I don't call it the Newtonian age, I call it the mechanical age of Bacon and Descartes. And its key principles are separation of nature and humans, but separation of every part of nature. There's no whole. Nothing is whole. It's just fragments. The second is this assumption that therefore you can separate the observer and the observed, and everything is an object with no life, no organizing capacity, no subjecthood, and no agency of its own. And with the idea of mastery. In fact, if you read Bacon, he talks so clearly about make nature your slave. I will teach you how to do it. And that then became the basis of every scientific thinking and institution. So how did the quantum thinking make a break of it? In a very beautiful way in which life works. Life evolves out of diversity, self-organization, and yet a coherence among all the self-organization. So it's always self-organization, autopoiesis, with symbiosis. The symbiosis is, I respect you, you respect me, and out of it grow the relationship. So the three principles of the quantum thinking that evolved, not no one dictated it. Everyone was doing their bit, and it hung together. The first is, there are no things in the world. There are no objects in the world. There's potential happening, waiting to happen and evolve, and that evolution into expressions of a wave or a particle comes through a relationship of the observer and the observed. There's no difference between subject and object. That phenomena, that process is what is the creative process. And because of potential, they know hard facts, as they constantly talked about. Potential has probabilities. Something could become this with this probability or become that with that probability. So probability of potential and transition then becomes the basic unit rather than certainty of this is the position and this is the momentum. So instead of certainty, we have uncertainty. Instead of determinism and control, we have indeterminism and participation. And finally, the beauty of it, that as Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen showed, that once a system has interacted, no matter how far apart you take the parts, they stay connected. And what you do to one, you do to the other. And that's called non-locality, entanglement. Everything is interconnected. You can never separate.
Right.
And how do these principles then become guides to life? Always be aware that there is another. No one's your object.
Right. Right.
You are living with other living beings who also have self-organization, conscience, capacity. And to merge in harmony with conscience is respect for life on earth, other human life. That's where peace emerges from. That's where harmony emerges from. And never seek control. If Bacon wrote 2 books, one is called The New Atlantis, in where he defines this Novog, and we're going to make plants grow according to our will for our use, And he laid it all out. The technologies weren't there, but he laid out that vision. The second was a masculine birth of time, of power, of control, and making nature a slave, but also in the process of defining a masculine birth of time, that women, with their knowledge, don't have knowledge. Yeah? So many apartheids were being created in that one process.
Right.
So out of that then comes the mechanisms of control, technologies of control. Synthetic fertilizers are the first, but they come out of the war thinking. The synthetic fertilizers are made from fossil fuels. The partnership between Standard Oil and IG Farben, the group of companies in Germany that were working together for Hitler. And they started to make explosives by burning fossil fuels at very high temperature. That same process, Haber-Bosch, made explosives on the one hand, but made fertilizers after that.
Yes, I remember.
So it's mechanistic and militarized, and the two go together. And I would say it's very masculinist. So the 3 M's go together. And because you have already defined a living person in the time of concentration camps, a living plant, the living soil, you've already defined them as inert and dead and absent.
Right.
You get the license to be violent.
Right.
Because you have no recognition.
There's no recognition.
Of the autopoiesis. Yeah?
Right.
And that's what brings limits.
Right.
That's what tells you what not to do.
It's interesting too, because it's when you start opening the door to unfolding this perspective that I think, my sense is that it's an inherent perspective in us, right? If you believe in the ancient traditions, right, the idea that everything is interconnected and that there is this web of consciousness, that consciousness is first principle, or in a way that the Vedanta, or in a way that so many world traditions talk about. In a way that myself as a psychologist can see that, you and I are related. This is a relational experience, that something grows out of it. That's part of, psychological training. It's that feels to me very inherent, and that somehow we've kind of limited and closed the door on this perspective of seeing our connection to the world and each other in a way that's more deeply meaningful, or, dare I say sacred, right? Sacred's supposed to say sacred because it has a religious connotation, but life is sacred. And when you start opening the door to that, people seem to naturally feel it. I would say they have that, the awareness starts to generate.
Well, I think when you remove the lids of pollution, of conditioning,
Of conditioning, yes.
And the natural state of every being, from cells and plants to human beings, without that conditioning,
Yes.
is to be a free expression of the one consciousness.
Yes.
Yeah? But unique to yourself.
Yes, of course.
And the two go together.
Right.
That's why autopoiesis and symbiosis go together in the biological world.
Right.
But autopoiesis at the consciousness level is I'm a conscious being. Symbiosis is I'm a compassionate being.
Right.
And the two go together.
It goes back to something that you had said that's like, the idea that it's not just us and nature in this kind of mechanistic way. It's like we are nature. And if we are, taking resources from nature and we're nature, it's like then the human starts to become a resource. And then it's a separation of different types of humans, of who's the resource to be extracted and exploited and who's not. Mm-hmm. But when does that line finally stop?
I think we educated relationships and interconnectedness and self-organization out.
Yeah.
Because it creates respect. Mm-hmm. It says, actually the sacred is not about religion. The sacred is about limits.
That's a nice point.
This is a beautiful sacred forest. Mm-hmm. You can't destroy it.
Right.
This is a sacred river. You can't pollute it. And I think the consciousness that we are part of one, undivided consciousness. We are unique expressions in that consciousness out of a particular place and our diversity of relationships. Mm-hmm. That's unique to us. That's why in philosophy we talk of dharma, but as swadharma.
Say it again.
Dharma is the right way, is a way of organizing around consciousness.
Yes.
Swadharma is your dharma because your relationships are unique. We are related in this relationship, but all your other relationships are unique to you. Mm-hmm. All my relationships are unique to me. But those relationships make who we are. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And so we talk of interbeings increasingly now, that we are self-organized beings, but we are interbeings. And the whole pranayama of breathing in and breathing out, the mantra with it is soham, you are, therefore I am. Mm-hmm. And so you are the condition of my being. You're the context of my being. But then you realize, where do I get my breath? From the trees.
Right.
And plants and the green leaf. They are the condition of my life. They are me when they become me. Or that lake is me because I get the water from there. And the soil and the seed and the biodiversity with the sun transformed into food becomes me. Mm-hmm. And there's no separation between the soil and that plant. And there's no separation in a realistic way because we even thought of the human body in that Baconian mechanistic way. And the mechanistic way is so ingrained in our children. I work with little children on the food consciousness. And you go to a school and say, what's the body? The body is the machine that is, and food is the fuel that runs the machine. Oh. As if it was just diesel. Yeah.
Wow.
But the body is really consciousness.
Right.
In expression.
Right. Yes.
In the concreteness of who and where we are. And food is consciousness, transforming the relationship of the embodied sunlight.
Yes.
The embodied drop of water, the embodied renewal of life of the seed. All of that distilled into what goes into us. And then in a new communication in our gut microbiome.
Right. I was just thinking that.
Which then shapes every cell, our brain, our blood, our bones. So you can think, the soil becomes the food, becomes us.
Right.
There's a mechanistic way of thinking is, you just need, the Cartesian way is, it's just dimension, it's just res extensa. All you need to do is this much calories. All you need to measure is on the labeling, on food safety.
Yeah.
This much sodium, this much fat, this much. And it doesn't tell you anything about the food.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's only, what is res extensa? The external, not the being.
Right.
In the process, you've substituted real food with ultra-processed and fake food now.
Yeah.
And at every level, it is at war. While producing in the soil and the toxics. And when we eat it, it's at war with the 100 trillion microbes in our gut microbiome.
Right. And then
So it's a constant, disease is a war.
Yeah. Disease is a war. That's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking like then we add probiotics that we have to take because we've taken it out of the soil. And then it makes me think like how much we are the soil if the soil has the probiotics that is in the soil that we're supposed to be eating, that's in the gut, that's in the heart, that's in the brain, and that's part of our consciousness, and how that's connected to the earth, the dirt. It's right there. That's like, you could have like a very tangible sense of interconnection, right?
Yeah.
And then you said the opposite of life is not death. The opposite of life is machine.
Because you see, death is not opposite of life for the simple reason it's part of life.
Yes.
Birth and death are two points in the same cycle of life. Everything as is living gets born. Everything as is living is maintained in uniqueness. And that's, to me, the mystery and wonder of life. When Schrödinger says, what is life? And says it's negative entropy. When the whole machine world is built on external inputs, external energy, pollution, and entropy. Here you have a form of life, embodied consciousness, which is able to reverse the laws of the machine.
Yeah.
Because life is not a machine.
Yeah.
And this basic, simple recognition is what, when they said we're going to now do GMOs and patent life, I said, okay, so for you, GMO means God move over and we are the creators and we will collect rents. But the seed is not a machine. And they said, by the time we are finished, it will be recognized as a machine we invented. I said, by the time I'm finished, respect for life, respect for the seed, respect for the farmers who protect the seed will at least be present in communities.
Right.
And not go extinct.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this, about Earth University. So it feels like it's a manifestation of your philosophies that's kind of come together. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
The Earth University is not a manifestation of my philosophy. It's a manifestation of the Earth. And, I just decided to start saving seeds because this idea was every seed will be genetically modified and controlled by us and patented. And that means the seeds will go. So I said the freedom of the seed to evolve on its own autopoietic terms is a freedom that I must defend. And the freedom of the farmer who has given us these seeds to save and share seeds, which is the highly human element of saving and sharing, that must be defended. So I defined it as seed freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Seed freedom, yeah.
And so I started to create community seed banks. 150 in India, but one main one where, my home valley, Dehradun. And then that grew into farm because then we had to do trials with these. We had to grow them out. We just planted 750 varieties of rice on our farm.
Wow.
And harvested a few months ago 250 varieties of wheat and every kind of pulse and nitrogen-fixing plant and every spice and every oil seed and 100 species of trees. And all of this, I did to save seeds. But when a seed becomes a plant, and that plant is in relationship, the pollinators come. It's 6 times more pollinators than the forest next door, which also teaches you do the right kind of farming. You don't have to be destroyer of biodiversity.
Right, it just creates.
And the soil organisms are just bursting. Even the soil scientists cannot believe. And I said, all we did was give back to the earth a little bit of what she'd given us. With gratitude, that much we know, and trust that she knows better about what to do with this. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And then people started turning up at the doorstep to say, I want to learn. So And then the Schumacher College got in touch with me and said, we must have a Schumacher College at your farm. And before I knew it, they said, we're offering the first course. And I had to, overnight in 6 months, build the first bed.
Oh, boy.
And the Earth University then grew. And so I call it the University of the Earth as teacher, nature as teacher.
That's beautiful.
We are just instruments.
Mm-hmm. The university is the earth as teacher. And that is, it seems like that's something that all schools and universities should have.
Absolutely.
Like how could it's almost like, right? It's like you're brought up by your mother and father, right? But your mother, like the earth is our mother.
Absolutely.
Can we please learn from our mother? Sometimes she has something positive to tell us and helpful.
And she is much older.
She is much older.
Just think of one little fact. Because plants have come into my life in a big way because of the seed, because seed is the plant. And now, I did a book on soil, not oil, connecting food and climate. But I've just finished a new book on nature of nature, because there are no debates anymore. The climate discourse is another polarized discourse.
Right.
You either have the deniers or you have the opportunists.
Right.
And that's why this book I've written is on the metabolic disorder of climate change. That the earth, if the earth is living, and she is living, she's Gaia, just like when we are fed rubbish, when we violate the food system at every point, there's a lot of abuse going on.
There's a lot of abuse. And we're abusing ourselves.
We're abusing. And therefore, every harm we do to the earth, we're doing to ourselves.
Exactly. That's that weird disconnection. Like every time I'm harming the earth, or even even another person, it's like it's coming back to me. I'm harming myself.
Yeah.
You can feel that. You can see that in what you're talking about. We're eating this because we're doing this for some kind of opportunistic reason. Yeah. And she has a metabolic disorder. We get metabolic disorders.
Yeah. We pitted the earth and humans against each other. And we defined more for humans by saying less for nature.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the more we could spray glyphosate, we thought somehow it was a miracle for humans.
Right.
And right now we've had this tragic landslide in Wayanad in South End. And the newspaper, in a typical way, besides the fact that they're reporting 350 dead, and they're saying maybe 450, the way they're reporting it is humans versus nature. 450 people died. How could it be beneficial to them to destroy the forest that protected it? But we've constantly become, human progress versus the environment. There cannot be human progress with a destroyed nature.
Right. Right.
And therefore, I think breaking free of the mechanical mindset is scientific imperative, ethical imperative of consciousness.
So even, breaking free of the mechanistic mindset is the scientific imperative at this point. Yeah. It's like we're beyond it. Yeah. We're beyond it. We just need to start seeing it more.
Exactly.
And when you're talking about it too, I was thinking about, as I'm speaking to you, you have such a sense of joy and levity about you. And I really appreciate sitting here with you. And I think about how you bring that into sometimes this work that can feel so difficult or demanding, or like, I can't believe this is happening again, some of these difficulties, but you seem to bring such a sense of joy to it. And I wonder about, is it because of how you value the interconnection or the inherent sense of service in what you're doing and the connection that you feel when you're with people or with the earth?
You recognized it, Elizabeth. Yes. The joy is in the interconnection. Mm-hmm. And so even when there's an assault, my focus is on the interconnections and integrity.
Yeah.
And the joy of service.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of activism that is very mechanistic, that acts in a divided world.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it centers.
Yes, interesting.
It centers the world around destructive powers. That's why I said, why do I always get called anti-globalization when I am defending the integrity of the earth? Why am I?
Pro-integrity of the earth.
Yeah. So it's always, what's the center? Well, there is no center. In a conscious world, the whole world is conscious. There's no one center.
Right.
It's everywhere.
Right.
And when you define the world with the centers of power, of destructive power, and you define yourself with respect to that, then what happens is every time that destructive power finds a new way to play tricks, you have the burnout.
Yes.
Because you work like a machine against a machine.
Yes.
Whereas you live as a conscious being, knowing there's a machine, but you address it in its pettiness. What else? There's very beautiful, to level the kind of mission of organization, which is, the name is Navdanya, which means 9 seeds, and it also means the new gift. And the word came to me from a tribal peasant when I was collecting seeds, and he was growing 9 crops. I said, wow, you're growing 9 crops, and I'd just done studies on monocultures in Punjab. And he looked at me and said, you stupid woman, yeah? He's basically, yes, the 9 crops I grow, the 9 planets, because in India we have, the Rahu Ketu, the 9 planets in the universe, the 9 crops in my field, and the diversity of food my family needs for health is one continuum of harmony.
Oh.
That's why I grow 9 crops.
Wow.
That's why I grow Navdanya. And that's when I named the movement Navdanya.
Oh.
But out of this tribal peasant came this amazing connectivity.
Yeah. This powerful
and common
wisdom,
harmony.
Beauty.
Beautiful.
It's poetic.
Health of the family, ecological health of the family, and cosmic health.
Wow.
Yeah?
Yes.
And the beautiful expression of non-locality.
Yes.
That my little field is connected to the cosmos.
Yes.
Therefore,
yes.
I have to take care of this field with cosmic care.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm doing. And I think that larger awareness,
yes.
it also brings with it humility.
Exactly.
That your actions have to be the right actions, generating the right harmony.
Yeah.
You don't fight big with big. You'll never be big. You don't want to be big. And so I've always told young people, I'm having burnout. I'm getting exhausted. Everyone says, well, you've been doing this for 50 years. How do you carry on? Well, I've been going on this planet for 4 billion. I said, don't think of yourself as atlases.
Exactly.
With the earth on your shoulder and you're carrying her. Remember, Mother Earth is carrying you. And just act in service.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And take joy in every moment.
I love that. I love that Atlas carrying the world versus Mother Earth carrying you. That's so beautiful. And it's like it's right there. It's right in front of you. It's like we're standing here. We're on the earth. Why are we carrying it? And, the other thing, too, we talked about this weekend has been the sense of awe and humility, like awed humility. And what you were just describing with the 9 seeds, it's exactly it, right? It's like connecting the cosmos to the health of my family and these 9 seeds. And it's like, it's that big, it's being a part of something so huge, right? And having this wonderful little part. So I feel a part of this amazing thing, but I'm, the humility of it, the respect for it.
I think, the humility and the larger consciousness go together.
Yes.
Whereas the mechanical mind creates lack of humility because you're in control.
Yep.
And pettiness. So the other thing that's been our inspiration is just one place where Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is mentioned. Vasundhara is the god, one of the 1,000 names. In India, we love giving 1,000 names to everything. The Ganges, Lalita, the 1,000 ways Mother Earth plays.
Yeah.
She plays.
Yeah. Play.
It's always play. It's always play. Never boring. I'm going to, create the perfect world. She's always at play. And Vasundhara is one of her names. And Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is Vasundhara as the earth, her family, which is the whole earth family. The trees, the grass, the butterflies, the bees. And it has just 2 lines. To say, this is mine and this is yours. To say, this person is my friend and this is my enemy, that's a petty mind. Yeah. The elevated mind sees the whole world as one family. So the largeness of consciousness embraces diversity, and with it, respect.
Yes. And it's like the elevated mind, elevated, but with humility.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
We've lost humility. We've lost a sense of humility. You know, everybody wants to be so important and in charge and in control. You know, like, it's profound to me. Like, we've lost a sense of humility. You know, it makes me think of, you know, vulnerability came back into popularity with Brene Brown, who wrote this best-selling book on the power of vulnerability, right? But it's like, you know, when you're more vulnerable and open, you're more able to connect with other people. But when you're more feeling like you have to be in charge and you have to have everything buttoned up so tightly, it's hard to relate to another person. And I feel like we've lost the sense of humility, and we've lost our ability to recognize how important and crucial and vital it is. And I don't know. What do you think about that? How can we bring that back? Is it just through this ongoing awareness of our interconnection?
I think the combination of awareness of relationship and proportion.
And what?
Proportion. Because the relationship puts you in proportion, you know, in the right relationship. But while you were talking, I mean, because I've worked so long on soil now, the Latin word for soil, for living soil, is humus.
Right.
And the word human is derived from it.
We need to remember that.
And the word humility is derived from it.
Yeah.
So to truly be human is to be of the soil, and to be truly human is to be humble, to not say the soil is dead earth.
I love that. That's great. So I have it's kind of a question that I heard about quantum I have to ask you. So it's been said that quantum physics or quantum theory is veiled reality. Is there divinity in some respect in the quantum?
Yeah, I think you can give consciousness different names, you know. The pervasive consciousness is what divinity is defined as in Indian philosophy. You know, there is no person in a particular place.
Right.
It's consciousness. And it's the creative force that then creates from itself all the expressions, and one could call that the veil. You know?
Yes. What would you say? Is that like Shakti or like?
I mean, I have always used Shakti as the creative power that brings forth. You know, on the one hand, you can define it as Maya, the illusions.
Right.
But when that same process defined as Shakti, then this consciousness, which is creative in its own power, brings all the forms into the world. You know?
Yes.
And that Shakti is in everything. And I'll give you a little story.
Please.
So, you know, I worked with Chipko from the 70s. And in 82, the Ministry of Environment asked us to do a study on mining, which was in my valley. So I came back to my valley for that and created my institution. And our study, which showed that the same limestone, it's like I just told, looks like just mineral to be extracted by the cement industry or the steel industry. And by just talking to women, as was the issue, this water, I then did the geohydrology, and that the cavities in the limestone is where water is held, and we just did the economy, you know?
Yeah.
If the limestone is left in the mountains, what economy does it serve? If it's extracted, which economy does it serve? Who? How much? And our basic study showed that the water economy was much bigger, served more people, had a just bigger contribution to society. Yeah. And on the basis of this study, the Supreme Court stopped the mining. The first case in history, I think, said when commerce undermines life, commerce must stop. Wow. Because life must carry on. And then after this decision, I got this huge group of women marching to my place, which interestingly, my institute, my mother had said, if you ever want to give up your job, take the cowshed. So when I gave up my job, I went to the cowshed and set up my institute called the Research Foundation. And so I saw this group of women marching up to my mother's cowshed and saying, what do you have against us? I said, why? Nothing. She said, why didn't you stop our mine? So I looked at the map. Their mine was not in the map the government gave us. It was outside, in the sense it was created illegally. And so if you do a chipko, will you join us? I said, sure. And then a few months later, while they were doing this blockade of the mine, they were attacked by the goons, which always goes hand in hand. And I got the message, so I went. We had to walk 8 miles up to the village. Wow. And so I went, and I thought, these women who've been beaten up will be in their homes. They were all bandaged, plastered, but they're still sitting at the protest site.
Wow.
And I said to this old woman, Itwari Devi, I said, where do you get the strength? You've just been beaten up. You've got a hand in plaster. Your friend has a bandage on her head, and you're sitting here. And she said something beautiful, which I'll never forget. She said, we're walking on the grass, and the grass bounces back. And we collect the leaves from these trees for our animals as fodder, and the leaves come right back. That Shakti that's in the grass and in the tree is a Shakti in us. That creative power that can never be extinguished.
That's great.
That's us.
That's great. I love that. That's so beautiful. There's nothing else to say. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I feel like non-scientists like me throw around the word quantum like it's some kind of holistic heal-all. I loved hearing an actual quantum physicist connect the theory to the real world in a way that makes our connection to nature even more powerful and important. Thank you to Vandana for joining us, and thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and think someone else might too, please rate the show and consider sending a link to a friend. We're excited to hear your thoughts. Share what resonated with you and leave us a comment. And follow us on @WonderstruckPod on Instagram. Wonderstruck is produced by Striking Wonder Productions with the teams at Bailey Newman and Creator Aligned Projects. Special thanks to Brian O'Kelly, Eliana Eleftheru, and Travis Reese. And remember, stay open to the wonder in life.